Hello and welcome to SRIRAM's IAS. Today in the series of economy from basics to advance, we shall be discussing three important concepts. One is of SLR, another is of CRR and then ICRR, incremental capital reserve ratio. Now, before we delve deeper into this discussion, I just want to make sure that you all recall with me that the banking system basically works on a particular principle of fractional reserves. This fractional reserve system says that the banks can lend money in the market based on all the deposits which they have collected. These deposits, in order to lend them in the market and ensure that banks have stability even after lending, the government and the regulators demand that these banks should keep at least some of these deposits as a reserve with themselves. Now, the ratio for these reserves is set by the central authority, and for this matter in India we have RBI. Now, once we set this playground for understanding of these reserve ratios and the fractional reserve banking system, we will now see what is this reserve ratio and what is actually this fractional reserve system. So, these reserves or reservable liabilities that commercial banks must hold on rather than they try to invest it or lend it out. Because we need to understand that why do banks actually lend and why are banks doing this business of lending. Banks loan क्यों देते हैं? In order to earn more interest. So in order to earn more interest, banks will tend to give more loans. But the problem with this is maybe some of the loans might not be repaid back. कुछ लोग ऐसे होते हैं, जैसे आपने सुना होगा, बहुत सारे बैंक के डिफॉल्टर्स होते हैं जो ये लोन वापस पे नहीं करते हैं. कभी कभी ऐसा होता है कि लोन की पेमेंट वापस आने में बैंक को डिले हो जाता है. And that is why you might be aware of this thing that there have been multiple frauds in the system, whether that was Lehman Brothers, whether that was 2008 subprime crisis, or whether that was recently PMC का crisis जो हमारे यहाँ हुआ, उसके साथ साथ नीरव मोदी का केस, उसके साथ साथ विजय माल्या का केस. There were multiple such cases in which we saw a bigger default or a bigger fraud done with the banking system, due to which the banking system crippled and the world economy actually collapsed in 2008. And post that in 2019 also, when the COVID came, we saw that economic setbacks were there. Now, in order to survive these setbacks, there is the system of fractional reserves. Now, once we understand this, that is the reserves which banks must hold with themselves and should not invest them or should not lend this amount of money into the market. Now, once we understand this, there is a minimum reserve which should be kept. Because अगर आप बैंक्स को बोलेंगे कि आपको 50% का रिजर्व अपने पास रखना है, 50% मार्केट में देना है, 50% का लोन बना के देना है मार्केट में, तब प्रॉब्लम क्या होगा? तब जो बैंक्स है वो कुछ कमा नहीं पाएंगे. They won't be able to earn much. They will be earning less. Therefore, this banking sector will be disincentivized to invest more in the market. Therefore, in order to understand and let banks lend more, we will do what? We will keep a minimum reserve. But this reserve should be that much in order to sustain all the crisis and in order to sustain the problems which will be associated with this lending activity. Understood? Now, the percentage of commercial banks' deposits that it must keep in cash or in reserves in case of mass customer withdrawals, also this is known as bank run. ठीक है. In case that जो depositors आते हैं एक बैंक के पास, suppose this is bank SBI and this bank has 10,000 rupees of deposits by all its customers. Now, इस बैंक ने lend कर दिया कितना? 10,000 rupees. Lend as loan. Now, what will be the problem? कि अगर इन कस्टमर्स में से कोई भी एक जाता है बैंक के पास कि मुझे दे दो वापस अपना पैसा, मुझे निकालना है, मुझे इसको यूज़ करना है, मेरे को खाना है, मुझे किसी काम में लाना है, मुझे इन्वेस्ट करना है, then bank won't be able to fulfill his demand. That is why these deposits are classified into two groups. One is demand deposit, another is time deposit or time liabilities we call them. Understood? Again, the reserve requirement is basically as per the reserve ratio, that how much ratio of reserves should be kept. If this is 10%, so all the deposits, 10% of all the deposits, 10% of 10,000, 1,000 rupees should be kept as reserve. Understood? Now, furthermore, if we lower the reserve, if the reserve ratio is decreased, the money supplied in the market will increase. Very simple concept. Again, banks can lend money at the lower interest rates. If banks lend money at the lower interest rates, it means more people will come to have this money. They will come and ask for more loans if the interest rates are less. This too will increase the money supply in market. To ensure that banks have money in the hand to prevent them from running out of cash, we will keep these reserves at optimum level. Now, once we understood this, we need to understand what are these reserve requirements, and these reserve requirements for fractional banking are kept under the Banking Regulation Act of 1949, Section 35A. Section 35A of this act says that RBI has this authority to regulate and set the reserve requirements or the reserve ratios in our banking system. So, under this act, RBI has set two reserves or two reserve requirements. One is CRR and another is SLR. What is the difference between the two, and what is cash reserve ratio and what is statutory liquidity ratio? What are these two ratios? First, let's understand SLR. SLR is basically a ratio, or let's understand first CRR. Again, CRR itself means cash रिजर्व रेशियो. बहुत ही सिंपल भाषा में इसका अनुवाद करेंगे, बहुत सिंपल तरीके से. कैश रिजर्व रेशियो सेज दैट द अमाउंट ऑफ deposits, the percentage of deposits which the banks should keep with themselves either in cash or they should invest it in government securities. Very simple. Now, why is this? In order to prevent bank run. That withdrawals के टाइम पे liquidity बैंक के पास हो, इसलिए इसको रखा गया है. Next is SLR, which is a bit complicated topic. Banks should hold the percentage of their fixed deposits and demand liabilities in the form of RBI approved liquid assets. Remember this, these assets, वो इस पैसे को इन्वेस्ट कर सकते हैं. कहाँ पे इन्वेस्ट करेंगे? लिक्विड एसेट्स में. कौन से लिक्विड एसेट्स में? जिनको आरबीआई ने अप्रूव किया है उसके बाद ही. आरबीआई हैज द पावर under this Banking Regulation Act of 1949 that it can regulate SLR for the scheduled commercial banks. As per this act, the SLR can be up to 40%. 0% से लेके 40% तक RBI बोल सकता है SLR रखने को. समझ में आ गया? Now, what are the assets which are under the SLR requirements? RBI ने कौन से liquid assets को approve किया है अभी तक? These are, they can keep this money in cash, they can keep this money as gold at current market price. Further, they can borrow or they can issue or utilize this money of SLR in government securities, bonds, treasury bills and state development loans. They can purchase these, they can invest this SLR amount or this SLR money into these instruments or any other instrument which is highlighted or notified by RBI. Banks can invest in that instrument also. After this, remember that why is SLR there? 2-3 reasons for keeping this SLR. One is to control the bank's credit, to ensure the commercial banks are solvent enough that they can pay their debt at time. What is the debt or what is the liability for banks? The liability for banks, as we gave the example, SBI का liability क्या है? The 10,000 rupees of depositors. This is the liability on bank. This liability, as I said, this can be time liability or it can be demand liability also. the SLR has to be invested in government securities. This money is taken by government and government utilizes this money in the public infrastructure and public expenditure. Understood? Long-term changes in the economy. This SLR controls the long-term changes in the economy. Understood? Chalo. Now, CRR under the Section 35A of Banking Regulation Act 1949, in order to establish monetary stability in the country, RBI prescribes CRR for these banks and without any ceiling or floor rate. That is, CRR का कोई रेट नहीं है, 0% से लेके 100% तक हो सकता है. अभी कितना है? अभी it's 4%. कितना है? 4%. CRR was prescribed at 6% of banks' total demand and time liabilities. Otherwise, it was earlier, जब Banking Regulation Act आया था 1949 में, उस टाइम पे recommendation आया था that it should be 6%, but currently we have कितना? 4%. Further, RBI Amendment Act of 2006 regulated that CRR can be 0 to 100%, as I said earlier also. Why? Because it is a medium to short-term liquidity management tool. That is, it manages liquidity in medium term and short term. कि अगर बैंकिंग सेक्टर में लिक्विडिटी ज़्यादा करनी है तो CRR कम करो, अगर लिक्विडिटी कम करनी है, मनी सप्लाई को डिक्रीज करना है तो CRR को बढ़ा दो. अंडरस्टूड? नाउ हमने अभी तक क्या देखा? अभी तक जो हमारा डिस्कशन था, दिस डिस्कशन वाज अबाउट दीज टू थिंग्स. वन वाज CRR and another was SLR. अभी तक we discussed this thing that CRR and SLR, that all the banking sector, all these banks do what? They collect money from depositors. They collect money from depositors. They release this money in the market and they create loans. Now, if these deposits are liabilities for banks, it means that these loans are actually assets for banks. So, this loan will help bank to earn two things. One is this loan will be paid back as its principal amount will be paid back plus the interest on this loan will be paid back. Therefore, bank will earn interest also on this. Understood? But here comes one more concept which you should understand properly. If not, you won't be able to solve the questions which are following after this. The concept is basically about money multiplier. We will discuss this concept in detail in the next video, but before that, I want just your attention that more number of banks, if there are more number of banks in the market, they will help us in creating more money. Creating more money. Now, if these banks are helping us in creating more money, how do they do this actually? कैसे करते हैं एक्चुअली में मनी मल्टीप्लायर काम कैसे करता है? बहुत सिंपल तरीका है. SBI ने जो ये 1000 रुपीज़ और 10,000 रुपीज़ का लोन दे दिया, this might be distributed among 10 different persons or this might be taken by a person who has a firm. वो इस 10,000 रुपये का क्या करेगा? वो इसको सैलरी के रूप में एम्प्लॉयज़ को दे देगा. Those employees will take some amount of it and deposit back into other banks. Now, 10,000 rupees was once deposited into SBI. SBI released a loan of these 10,000 rupees. Then, out of these 10,000, 9,000 were deposited into ICICI Bank and ICICI Bank created a loan of 8,000 rupees. But actual mein, again, once this 7,000 out of this 8,000 was again released in the market by the person who took this loan, out of these 7,000, 6,000 rupees were again deposited into HDFC Bank by some of the people in the economy. Now, this multiplication of money will happen, and this multiplication of money, that is 9,000, 8,000, 6,000, this will help the economy to create more money. But in order to regulate money supply in the market, if the RBI wants that there should be less money in the market, what RBI or what government has to do is, जो ये रिजर्व यहाँ पे रख रहे हैं 1000 रुपीज़ का और यहाँ पे रख रहे हैं 1000 रुपीज़ का या फिर यहाँ पे रख रहे हैं 1000 रुपीज़ का, इस रिजर्व को बढ़ाना पड़ेगा, इस रिजर्व की रिक्वायरमेंट बढ़ानी पड़ेगी। सिंपल, अगर इसको 1500 कर दिया तो they will keep 1500 with themselves as reserve and rest of the money will be flown into market. Therefore, if the CRR or SLR is increased, this will lead to decrease in money supply in the market. Understood? That is why RBI uses these two tools in order to regulate money supply in the market. Now, once you understand this, we can move ahead with the concept which we were discussing. And at the last, we need to understand that in order to regulate the short term and medium term money supply in the market, SLR and CRR. The CRR is used for short term and medium term, while as SLR is used for long term money supply in the market. Now, once you understand this, now it will be easy for you to understand ICRR, that is incremental capital reserve ratio. Incremental cash reserve ratio, incremental cash reserve ratio. Now, once you understand this, I was confusing it with ICRR, this is incremental cash reserve ratio. Now, once you understand CRR and SLR, there is one more ratio. That is saying that if in case that it pertains that RBI needs to control the money supply at all, like it happened in demonetization. At demonetization times, RBI said that from 16th of September to 11th of November, there will be 100% incremental cash reserve ratio. That is, all the notes of 500 denomination and 1000 denomination, all the notes of 1000 and 500 denomination will be kept as cash as received by banks with themselves. They will keep this cash as it is and submit it to RBI. And then there was replacement of these notes. Now, this ICRR is used by RBI as a measure in those terms or at that point of time when there is sudden requirement of this kind of emergency, whether that was post demonetization or whether that was अभी recently जब 2000 रुपीज़ के नोट्स को बंद करना था, जब 2000 रुपीज़ के नोट्स को वापस लेना था मार्केट से. So ICRR on deposits that were lent to specific sector, automobiles, housing, MSME was zero in 2020. Why so? कि ICRR जो है इन सेक्टर्स पे बिल्कुल जीरो कर दिया गया कि आप यहाँ पे इंक्रीमेंटल कैश रिजर्व रेशियो जीरो कर दो. आप यहाँ पे अगर लोन दे रहे हो तो पूरे का पूरा लोन जितना आपने डिपॉजिट दिया उतना दे दो आगे, ताकि क्योंकि हमने देखा था पोस्ट कोविड टाइम पे ऑटोमोबाइल सेक्टर, हाउसिंग सेक्टर एंड एमएसएमईज में बहुत ही ज़्यादा डी ग्रोथ देखने को मिला था, बहुत ही ज़्यादा डी ग्रोथ देखने को मिला था. वी सॉ स्टैग्नेंट सेक्टर्स ओवर देयर, वी सॉ देयर वाज नो डिमांड ऑफ ऑटोमोबाइल्स इन द मार्केट, एंड दैट इज व्हाट लेड ऑल ऑफ अस टू थिंक अबाउट ICRR, CRR एंड SLR. आई होप आपको ये सब चीज़ें क्लियर हुई होंगी आपके दिमाग में. विद दिस आई विल कंक्लूड टुडेज डिस्कशन, but before that we will discuss some of the PYQs which UPSC asked. Now the question says money multiplier in an economy increases with which one of the following? Increase in the cash reserve ratio. Now come on, all of you with me, tell me, if the cash reserve ratio increases, will there be more money multiplier effect? No, because more the reserves are there, lesser the money will flow in the market and lesser will be the impact of multiplier. Increase in the banking habits of population, yes. More the money flowing towards banks, more money flowing into banking system will lead to more loans, and more loans to more banks will lead to more deposits into more banks. Therefore, if ज़्यादा लोग डिपॉजिट करने लग जाएं, अगर ज़्यादा लोगों की हैबिट बन गई बैंकिंग सेक्टर में डिपॉजिट करने की, उतना ही ज़्यादा लोन क्रिएट हो सकता है जितने ज़्यादा डिपॉजिट्स होंगे. दैट इज़ वाई इंक्रीजिंग द हैबिट ऑफ पॉपुलेशन विल हेल्प अस इन इंक्रीजिंग व्हाट? Money multiplier. Understood? That is why we discuss this concept, because it is interlinked with CRR and SLR. If the RBI decides to adopt an expansionist monetary policy, now for you I will explain what is expansionist monetary policy. It is simple. When RBI wants to expand the economy, but if you want to expand the economy, it means you want to grow the economy. If you want to grow the economy, the fuel to economy is money, and where from you get this money is from the banking sector, because all the loans are generated by banking sector only. And if you want to promote banking sector and more loans from banking sector, you need to provide easy money. You need to provide low cost money or low interest based money for banks. That is why in order to adopt an expansionary monetary policy, RBI will do what? It will increase the money supply in the market. Money supply in the market should be increased. But remember, which one of the following would it not do? RBI क्या नहीं करेगा? If it cut and optimize SLR, अगर इसने SLR को decrease कर दिया तो क्या होगा? Expansionary monetary policy होगी? Yes, it will happen. So ये तो करना पड़ेगा. Increase the marginal standing facility rate, MSF को increase करेगा. Cut the bank rate and repo rate, bank rate और repo rate को decrease करना है. Select the correct answer from the given code below. ठीक है, बहुत ही सिंपल चीज़ है. अगर इसने इंक्रीज कर दिया मार्जिनल स्टैंडिंग फैसिलिटी रेट, अगर इसने कट कर दिया बैंक रेट या रेपो रेट, पहला स्टेटमेंट आपको समझ में आया होगा. दूसरा स्टेटमेंट आपको समझ में आया होगा कि बैंक रेट को डिक्रीज करना या रेपो रेट को डिक्रीज करना, इन दोनों से क्या होगा? बोथ ऑफ देम फॉलो एक्सपेंशनरी मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. दिस टू फॉलोज एक्सपेंशनरी मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. देयरफॉर these two should not be there. 1 and 3 should not be there. Understood? अगर 1 and 3 नहीं होगा आंसर, तो फिर आंसर क्या होगा ये आप कमेंट सेक्शन में बताएंगे. Last question is about sterilization, but yes, I want to highlight over here that this was one of the questions which UPSC took back. ठीक है, यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा डिबेट में आ गया था ये क्वेश्चन कि क्या होती है स्टेरिलाइजेशन. इट इज बेसिकली कंडक्टिंग दी ओपन मार्केट ऑपरेशंस, oversight of settlement and payment system, debt and cash management for central and state governments, regulating the functions of non-banking financial institutions. So there were multiple answers which were contended in the court, and that is why this question was taken back by RBI. However, the most appropriate answer was open market operations. With this, we will conclude today's discussion. Thank you for being here. I think and I believe in this thing that आपको ये discussion बहुत अच्छा लगा होगा. Now tell me in the comment section if you have any suggestions for this series, because this series is for you and it should be run by you only. If you demand any specific topics, we will take that. If you want us to do something more in this video, the feedback section is always open for you. It's always for the students, and it's never for the commercial purposes. It's always for the benefit of students. Thank you. Jai Hind.